Hey, Awaken City, it's so good to join you here online as we zero in and focus on the thought of what it means to gear up for the adventure of faith, for the journey that God's leading us all into as He, in His heart, desires to take us higher than we've ever been before in Him by us allowing Him to work deeper in us than ever before. You know, I have the honour on Wednesdays, Thursdays and Fridays of doing the school drop-off. And it's hilarious. So I get up without fail and constantly feel like I'm running behind as I'm getting the kids ready for school. And it hasn't gotten any easier, even though my eldest son, Liam, now is 11 years old and rides his bike to school, gets himself ready and he completely looks after himself. You think that 1 out of the 3 doing that would make things easier for me, but it just seems to be that my 2 youngest, Zoe and Flynn, are hilarious. Get so distracted with Lego, get so distracted with all the things that are going on, the cat, the dog, whatever, that even getting dressed is an ordeal. And then getting them to help me pack their lunches is at times 10. And a couple of weeks ago, I got to school and we got there just on time. I have a real gift for either getting my kids to school just on time, just as the bell is about to go, or just after the bell. And we got Zoe to class, and then we took Flynn, the youngest, he's in pre-primary, and we're there opening up his bag, and we're meant to pull out the little bag that he's got for his crunch and sip, which is his recess, and it's not there. It's like, Flynn, where's your crunch and sip? Oh, I forgot to pack it. And then we open up his lunchbox, it's there, but his drink bottle is nowhere to be found. And then just as he opens the door to walk into the room, the teacher sticks her head out and says, Flynn, did you bring your library bag? And Flynn looks up at me with all sincerity and says, Dad, we've missed so much today. You're going to have to go home and pick it all up. And I had to go home and do a second trip to school. You know, it is really important, not just with school drop-off, but in our day-to-day life, to make sure that we gear up for the adventure ahead, that we make sure we've got added to ourselves, that we've loaded ourselves up with the things that we actually need to thrive in our day-to-day. And school drop-offs aside, I'm convinced more than ever as we continue to chart a course where we're going against the flow of the culture around us, where we need to be people who, as we choose to follow Jesus, that we add to ourselves the things that are necessary for us to continue to take ground in every area of life. Now, there's a book in the Bible that jumps out to me about what it means to be a people that are on adventure, on the journey, and adding to themselves the things that they need to thrive, not just survive in life. That book, Hebrews, written to a people who were disenfranchised and who had been scattered abroad, who are seeking out new homes and new ways of doing things in their greater community and time and age that they were in. And Hebrews covers with it this big idea of what it means to live with a literal faith that changes our day-to-day life, even in the midst of the worst situations and scenarios. And the writer of Hebrews challenges these people who have known what it's meant to be God's people, who have known what it's meant to encounter God in their history, but now choose to live out of what God's leading them into in the future, because they've geared up for the journey ahead. I want to unpack a portion of Hebrews, possibly my favourite portion, out of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 to 10, where the writer sets up this idea that what we need is a real, living, vibrant faith that makes a difference to who we are and how we live. And that in this chapter, the writer of Hebrews almost goes through a Hall of Fame moment where the writer is unpacking or mentioning people who have done the journey, who have geared up for the adventure, who have lived a life of faith, and the difference that their example provides for us today. So the writer starts off in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, saying this, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks even though he is dead. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac, Jacob, his children, grandsons, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. The writer of Hebrews basically picks on the first book in the Bible, Genesis, the seedbed of the entire Bible, the beginning flow of the story of how God is working in and through mankind to seek and to save us. And the writer of Hebrews basically does a running commentary on people that we're introduced to in this very first book in the entire Bible. And a running commentary of especially those who are able to live a life where they responded out of faith. They were able to add to their lives the type of faith that allowed them to gear up for the journey that was ahead of them. With many of them facing great critical crises and pressure points, that they were able to add to themselves through their faith what was necessary to not only please God, but to live a life of significance in the eyes of God himself. So they're here as a reminder to us of what it means to be willing to live a life where we've geared up for the journey ahead. The first person that the writer of Hebrews highlights is Abel. And we're introduced to Abel and his brother Cain in Genesis, where we have the first recorded account of people worshipping God with sacrifices. And it's interesting to note that from the beginning, it was always set up that it should cost us to come to God in worship. And I know that might be a foreign concept to us today, that the idea is that shouldn't we come to God who is loving and giving and just receive from him? But the idea for something to truly be an act of worship from us is that it should cost us something. That for something to be an expression of worship, it comes out of an overflow where we've sacrificed something. We've been willing to lay down ourselves so that we come under the one that we serve. And in this account, you've got Cain and Abel bringing their offerings to God. And you've got one who's basically brought, in a running, rolling picture of Scripture, basically what was easy, what was something that would cost him the least amount, whereas Abel brings the best of his animals, brings the best of what he's got, and lays it down. See, if we want to gear up for the adventure ahead, if we want to hold course, if we want to be the type of people that come what may, we're unmovable in our faith, we have to first and foremost be people like Abel, who are willing and open to embracing the idea of I will do it even if it costs me. You know, I was searching around the other day doing some research online and came across the idea of a business that was being started up by a personal trainer. Now, I've got no interest in getting involved in personal training. I, in fact, maybe need to connect with a personal trainer, but I was fascinated as this person's unpacking how they're building their business. And they were experimenting. And the way they experimented was basically they had advertised their services and said, you can book in a free consult with me. And in that free consult, I'll set you up to begin your journey towards health. And he did that one day and had availabilities booked out. And then the second day, just an experiment for himself, he booked out the other day for consults, but they cost $97. And the idea was in that second consult that he would spend more focused time and that he would be able to really set somebody up for the win in a different way. And he wanted to see what would happen to his business with a free offer and a costed offer. And in the research that I came across, he was reporting that he found that out of the bookings he made for the free offer, only 15% of the clients actually rocked up for their free consultation. That they had signed up, that they had said that they were coming, they had RSVP'd, they'd communicated that they would be there, even after a reminder, but they did not show up, or at least 85% didn't. Whereas on the second day, he had less people sign up for that, but 100% of them showed up. Why? Because it costs them something. And he was making the point as he's trying to launch out of this business that not to get into the trap of thinking that free is best, that cost is okay. Same for us as we gear up for the journey ahead. Faith, real faith, costs us. It costs us in our willingness to be generous with our resources. It costs us in our willingness to open ourselves up to the people that we're journeying with. It costs us. And if we're willing to add that to our faith as we're journeying along, we can be just like Abel, who even though things played out in an interesting way for him, his faith still stands to us today as a Hall of Fame moment of what it means to go beyond our moments. We've got Abel. The second person that is mentioned in this portion of Scripture is Enoch. Now, Enoch's a very interesting person in the life of the Scriptures. We don't know a lot about him. Basically, when we're introduced to him in the book of Genesis, we basically come along with this plan that there's this guy, Enoch, who was walking with God, and then in his intimacy in walking with God, something frankly amazing takes place where he is caught up to heaven and bypasses death itself. Now again, it's only mentioned very quickly in Genesis. It's a blink and you miss it sort of moment. Exactly how it happened, I'd struggle to explain it to you in the depth that it deserves, but I know it happened. It's an account that is highlighted as an example of the Hall of Fame of faith. And so Enoch's example in gearing us up for the journey ahead should remind us the importance of adding to ourselves a genuine desire for intimacy with God. That as we, every single one of us, are willing to not just give lip service to our faith, but actually walk it out and live it, that breeds and brings a genuine intimacy to our faith. A type of intimacy that wouldn't it be wonderful if we're caught up to heaven, but at the very least, we get above our problems and our circumstances and the things that would seek to overwhelm us. We're able to live life from a completely different perspective. I'm convinced that as we gear up for the journey ahead, we have to add to ourselves a willingness to count the cost and sacrifice. But in that, we have to constantly bring into our day-to-day a desire for genuine intimacy with God. And Enoch's example is that he simply walked with God. What does it mean to walk with God? It's got no air or pretense. It's not for anybody else to see. It's for us to live out. It's an invitation to process our day-to-day through the lens of faith, through the heart of a desire to connect with the Creator of all things, who is willing, happy, and desires for us to know Him in everything. I'm mindful in the book of James chapter 4, it says for us to draw near to God and He'll draw near to us. I am convinced that God comes where He's wanted and that we get to choose the level of intimacy that we get to have with our Creator if we're willing to live out the type of faith that is walking with Him day to day. To gear up in our faith, we're reminded to add to our faith sacrifice. We're reminded to add to our faith intimacy. And in this portion of Scripture, the writer also goes on after talking about Abel and Enoch to talk about Noah. Noah is the one who was mandated to build the ark as God is dealing with a broken and fractured world by giving it a fresh start. And Noah speaks to us about this idea of being willing to stand even in the midst of adversity. See, the deal is that it took an extended period of time for Noah to build this ark. This was not something that happened immediately. It was a long drawn out process, a process where people would have ridiculed him and would have caused him to doubt even whether he's hearing right. But yet in the midst of it all, if Noah had given up at any point when the flood hit, there wouldn't have been anything to flee into. And I think of the days and the weeks and the months and the years that it took to build this large floating structure by hand, and that the dedication it took to simply get up day after day after day after day and stand. You know, if we need to add to our faith not just a willingness to count the cost and sacrifice or a desire for genuine intimacy, but in that we need to add to our faith the type of faith that is just willing to stand no matter what. That when resistance comes, when we feel like the flood is pushing us away from who we're called to be and what we've called to be, that we stand as people like Noah facing the flood head on and we do not allow ourselves to budge. Because we've heard the heartbeat of God. And we know that no matter how tough it gets, the right way to live is a life lived in pursuit of the things that God has made available for us. You know, I'm mindful that Abel reminds us about the sacrifice and Enoch reminds us about intimacy. Noah teaches us how important it is to gear up by standing no matter what. And finally, the last person that this portion of Hebrews unpacks is Abraham. I just want to quickly read that portion of Scripture again. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, it says this: by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance. So this is important. From Abraham was born, was shaped, was created an entire nation. That at the time of Abraham, while you had individual families followed the one true God, there was a lot of mixture and there was a lot of brokenness, and people were forming and fashioning their own gods out of images and out of their own desires to meet their own needs out of themselves, instead of living a life where they were willing to count the cost and willing to draw in intimacy towards God and willing to stand no matter what. That what happened during the time of Abraham is that God calls him out of his homeland, out of his father's household, so that God could create out of Abraham an entire new thing, something that had not yet existed on the face of the earth, an entire people built around a culture of what it meant to build a culture of faith where they geared up for the journey, where they had in their faith and in their processes of life a system where they valued the cost of worship, where they were willing to walk in intimacy with God, where they were able to stand even against the world around them. And so Abraham leaves his land, leaves the inheritance that was promised to him in his own family line to go towards an inheritance that God was promising for him directly. It says in verse 8, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Verse 9, by faith he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were his heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. You know, as we gear up for the journey ahead, I think one of the most valuable things we could add to our faith is this idea that we know we're on adventure and we're not home yet. See, it's interesting to me that even though Abraham goes into the land that God promised for him, even though he receives it, even though he is blessed significantly through it, even though much of the book of Genesis, after stating the scene of these different people of faith, goes on to focus on Abraham directly and his descendants, that in all that blessing, in all that favour, Abraham could see something more, could see something bigger on the horizon, could see that the here and now was simply paving for what was yet to come in the heartbeat of God. See, he could see a city far more splendorous and far more amazing than anything physically there. He could see what God was wanting to build in and through his faith and the faith of the people that were willing to follow the living God. And so he added to his faith this idea that he saw himself as a stranger in a foreign land, a stranger in his own land, a stranger in the land that God had given him, because he wanted what was more. He could see beyond. And church, I want to submit this to you as we continue to gear up for the year ahead, as we're right now in March and we're powering on into 2023. We have to be a people who are searching and seeking for more. That we need more of the presence of God in our lives, that we need more of his wisdom and revelation and understanding, that we need more of his grace in our day-to-day, that we need to be people who want more. Because Abraham had that in his faith, and it led to all that he was able to experience. You know, I want to encourage you, at whatever point you are in your journey with Jesus, we want to do whatever we can to encourage and empower and equip you along the way. If you're hearing this message from whatever point, and maybe you're at a point in your life where you know you need to get on track in your faith journey and start gearing up for yourself, please allow us the opportunity to stand with you and support you in whatever way we can. Simply email us at hello@awakencity.com.au and we'll have a team member get in contact with you and support you in whatever way we can. I want to encourage you, let's be people who are willing to gear up for the journey and the adventure ahead. Let's count the costs. Let's be willing to worship, not just with our lips, but with everything we have. Let's be people who are willing to stand no matter what. Let's be people who are willing to look for more. And let's not give up in doing everything that God's called us into. God bless you. Have a fantastic week.